Summer is here. At Orderly Meds, we know this time is a reminder that life is full of new beginnings. Whether you're celebrating the nice weather, starting a new chapter, planning a vacation, or simply looking ahead to what's next, this season can be the perfect time to invest in yourself and your health. If you've struggled with weight loss and are curious about GLP-1 medications, Orderly Meds can help you learn about your options. Through a simple virtual process, you can connect with licensed medical professionals who can determine whether treatment may be appropriate for you. Getting started is fast, convenient, and happens online from the comfort of home. This summer, consider a new approach to feeling your best. Visit orderlymeds.com/podcast to learn more. That's orderlymeds.com/podcast. orderlymeds.com/podcast. Because every new season is an opportunity to take the next step forward. Compounded medications are not FDA approved. Eligibility required and determined by a licensed provider. Individual results may vary. See website for details.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. In May 1944, an American military unit captured an airstrip deep in the jungles of northern Burma. The objective was Myitkyina, a critical Japanese-held airfield that, if taken, would open a supply corridor connecting India to China. The men who took it had been fighting continuously behind enemy lines for nearly 4 months. They had marched roughly 750 miles through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. They were all starving. Most of them were sick with malaria, with dysentery, with diseases that had no cure available in the field. By the time they reached Myitkyina, the unit that had started the campaign roughly 3,000 strong had been reduced to a few hundred men, still capable of fighting. They took the airfield anyway. Their official name was the 53rd07th Composite Unit. History remembers them by the name of their commander, Merrill's Marauders. The History Brief today returns to History is Weird and why the U.S. government once exploded a whale. This day in history. A quick word from our sponsors.
Summer is here. At Orderly Meds, we know this time is a reminder that life is full of new beginnings. Whether you're celebrating the nice weather, starting a new chapter, planning a vacation, or simply looking ahead to what's next, this season can be the perfect time to invest in yourself and your health. If you've struggled with weight loss and are curious about GLP-1 medications, Orderly Meds can help you learn about your options. Through a simple virtual process, you can connect with licensed medical professionals who can determine whether treatment may be appropriate for you. Getting started is fast, convenient, and happens online from the comfort of home. This summer, consider a new approach to feeling your best. Visit orderlymeds.com/podcast to learn more. That's orderlymeds.com/podcast. orderlymeds.com/podcast. Because every new season is an opportunity to take the next step forward. Compounded medications are not FDA approved. Eligibility required and determined by a licensed provider. Individual results may vary. See website for details.
On July 12, 1862, Congress authorized the creation of the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in the United States, recognizing extraordinary acts of bravery in combat. On July 12, 1998, France defeated Brazil to win its first FIFA World Cup, a victory celebrated not only for its sporting significance, but also as a symbol of diverse and modern France. Story of the Day. The Marauders were formed in 1943 at the direct request of General Joseph Stilwell, the American commander in the China-Burma-India theater. A theater that received a fraction of the resources, attention, and supplies allocated to the European and Pacific fronts. Stilwell needed a long-range penetration force, a unit capable of operating deep behind Japanese lines in Burma, cutting supply routes and disrupting Japanese forces to support the broader Allied campaign to reopen the Burma Road. Roughly 3,000 American volunteers were recruited, many of them already combat veterans from the Pacific or other theaters, pulled together specifically for this mission and placed under the command of Brigadier General Frank Merrill. The unit had no artillery. It had limited heavy equipment. It depended almost entirely on air resupply. Mules and men carrying what they could, with food, ammunition, and medical supplies, dropped from cargo planes when conditions allowed. The terrain they were about to enter was, by every account, some of the worst combat environment any American force faced during the Second World War. Burma in 1944 was mountainous, densely forested, and crossed by rivers that became raging torrents during monsoon season. The heat was extreme. The humidity was constant. Leeches, mosquitoes, and disease bearing insects were everywhere. Malaria, dysentery, typhus, and fungal conditions that became known as jungle rot attacked the men relentlessly, often more effectively than the Japanese forces that they were fighting. The Marauders operated continuously behind enemy lines for 5 separate major engagements between February and August of 1944, moving on foot through terrain that made conventional supply nearly impossible. They fought outnumbered repeatedly against Japanese forces that knew the terrain far better than they did. At the Battle of Album in March 1944, the Marauders helped encircle and rout Japanese forces, opening a path deeper into Burma. Then in April, one battalion was surrounded and besieged for nearly 2 weeks, sustained almost entirely by airdrops, before relief forces broke through. Each engagement won ground, but each engagement also cost the unit men that it could not replace in the middle of the Burma jungle. What makes the story of the Marauders so brutal is not simply the combat, it is what happened to the men between the battles. There was no extended rest, there was no rotation home. The unit had been told before the mission began that it would serve a specific limited tour and then be relieved. That promise did not hold. As the campaign expanded further and further beyond its original timeline, the Marauders kept being ordered forward deeper into the Burma jungle, toward Myitkyina, with no relief in sight. Men who collapsed from exhaustion, malaria, or dysentery were evacuated when possible. If not, they were simply buried. Many who should have been evacuated were not, because, well, there was no one left to replace them. By the time the unit approached Myitkyina in May 1944, men who could barely stand were still being sent forward because the mission required bodies, and there was nothing left to send except the men who were already there. This was not an accident of poor planning. This was a deliberate decision by commanders who needed the airfield taken and had run out of other options. The capture of Myitkyina Airfield on May 17, 1944, was a genuine strategic success. It also effectively destroyed the Marauders as a fighting force. Of the roughly 3,000 men who had begun the campaign, fewer than 200 remained fit for combat by the time the airfield was secured. The rest were dead, evacuated due to wounds, or incapacitated by disease so severe that many never fully recovered for the rest of their lives. The siege of the town of Myitkyina itself, the airfield was taken quickly, but the surrounding town held out for weeks longer, dragged what remained out of the unit through additional brutal fighting they had no real capacity left to sustain. The Marauders were formally disbanded in August of 1944. The unit had existed officially for barely a year. In that time, it had marched further, fought longer, and suffered more from disease and exhaustion than almost any comparable American unit of the entire war. For decades, the story of the Marauders was filtered through Hollywood. A 1962 film, Merrill's Marauders, told a version of events that emphasized heroism and adventure, compressing months of grinding attrition into tidy combat narrative. The reality that veterans actually lived through, the slow disintegration of a unit through disease and impossible demands rather than dramatic combat alone did not translate easily to film. It also did not translate easily into the kind of recognition that the men deserved. The Marauders received a Distinguished Unit citation. Individual decorations followed for specific acts of valor. But for years after the war, many veterans felt that what had actually happened to them, the broken promises about relief, the deliberate decisions to keep sending exhausted and sick men behind enemy lines forward because the mission demanded it, was not something the Army was eager to examine too closely. History brief. Sometimes history asks important questions. Questions about war, questions about democracy, questions about the rise and fall of civilizations. And sometimes history asks, what happens if you blow up a dead whale with half a ton of dynamite? Yes, that actually happened. On November 12th, 1970, residents of the Oregon coast found themselves facing an unusual problem. A dead sperm whale had washed ashore near the town of Florence. It was enormous. The whale weighed roughly 8 tons and was rapidly decomposing. Local authorities needed to get rid of it before the smell became unbearable and before it became a public health problem. Reasonable solutions were considered. The whale could be buried. It could be cut apart and removed. But officials from the Oregon Highway Division came up with another idea. Why not just blow it up? The theory sounded surprisingly logical. Use explosives to scatter the whale into small pieces. Seagulls and other scavengers would eat the remains, and nature would take care of the rest. Problem solved. At least that was the plan. So workers placed approximately 20 cases of dynamite, roughly half a ton, beneath the carcass. Then they backed away. The public gathered to watch. Television cameras rolled, and someone pressed the detonator. The explosion launched enormous chunks of whale hundreds of feet through the air. Instead of vaporizing, much of the whale remained very much intact. Massive pieces of blubber and flesh began raining down on spectators. One large chunk crushed a parked car. People fled in every direction. The seagulls, meanwhile, wisely stayed away. A local television reporter captured the entire disaster on camera, producing one of the greatest pieces of accidental comedy in American history. His calm narration becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as whale parts began falling from the sky. Even better, the video survived, and decades later, it became one of the first viral videos of the internet age. What's fascinating is that nobody involved was being reckless or malicious. They genuinely thought that they had found a practical solution. The problem was that nobody had ever really tested the theory. As it turns out, dead whales don't neatly disintegrate when subjected to massive amounts of explosives. Instead, they become airborne, which is a distinction that proved important. Today, the exploding whale has become a legendary part of Oregon history. It even has its own commemorative events, merchandise, documentaries, and roadside historical markers. And perhaps the weirdest part of all of this? The lesson was actually learned. When another whale washed ashore in Oregon years later, officials chose a different disposal method. No dynamite, no explosions, and no flying whale parts. History had provided sufficient data. So why did the US government explode a whale? Well, because they were trying to solve a problem. Because no one quite thought through the consequences. And because sometimes the line between engineering and comedy is much thinner than we'd like to admit. A dead whale, half a ton of dynamite, one destroyed automobile, and one of the greatest government miscalculations ever caught on camera. History sure is weird. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you're enjoying this show and would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both of those links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. I also hope you guys check out our YouTube channel where we have different videos and series that are not part of this main feed. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.
Este comercial es para convencerte de no manejar a exceso de velocidad. No podemos usar sirenas en la radio, así que usaremos otros sonidos igual de impactantes para que pongas atención. Si manejas un poco o mucho sobre el límite de velocidad, igual puedes chocar. Puedes lastimarte o, peor aún, lastimar a otros.
Estoy en la escena del choque.
Y el daño que causes será irreparable. ¿Ves? No tuvimos que usar sonidos de choques o ambulancias. El exceso de velocidad no vale la pena. Traído por Netza.